Good evening, I'm Dr. Jason Wingard, Dean of the School of Professional Studies at Columbia University. We are joined today by James O'Neill, Commissioner of the New York Police Department. Today we are here for a very poignant discussion on new policing strategies in times of racial divide. Commissioner, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Jason.
Through our Talks at Columbia Thought Leadership Series, I have the opportunity to engage with leaders of state, CEOs in the C-suite to talk about leadership challenges affecting their organizations. To a person, I have a chance to and the opportunity to talk about their experience and the influences that have guided them through this process. Tell us where you came from and particularly how you rose up through the ranks of the New York City Police Department, what your childhood upbringing, how that bridge to your rise to fame in the New York City Police Department has influenced you and the markers along the way that have made you the leader you are now.
So I don't want to go too far back, otherwise, I just turned 60 last August. We'd be here all night. But I grew up in a large family. I was born in Brooklyn. I lived in East Flatbush till I was 12. I was going into the 7th grade when we moved out to Jersey. I'm number 4 out of 7. I have 2 older sisters, an older brother, 2 younger sisters, and a younger brother. And I have a very strong mom who continues to be an influence to today. She's 86. She's going to be 87 in August, and she's the boss. And if you take a look at what everybody in my family is doing, you can see what a great influence that she is and that she was when we were growing up. She told us from day one to once we started to understand what the world was all about, that this isn't about you. Right? This is about you have to do your best, but you have to also try to make the world move forward, however slightly that might be. It's certainly not about you as an individual. It's about family. Family is important, but it's even bigger than that. My older sister Pat's a nurse. She's been doing that for probably over 40 years. My sister Sheila she worked at a Fortune 500 company. She was in charge of human resources. She just retired. John's a lawyer. I don't hold that against him. My younger brother Hugh is he works in pharmaceuticals. And then Catherine works in IT, and my younger sister's an opera singer / real estate person. I don't know how you get that combo, but she managed to do that. So we talk in 2018. It's easy to talk every day. There's a thread that all 7 of us are on every day, just checking in to see how everybody's doing, and I think that keeps us going and keeps us moving forward. But I think my family had a lot to do with it. I have an uncle. Uncle Bill just passed away 2 years ago. He was a cop. He's really the only cop that I knew. I don't come from a police officer family. I don't come from a cop family. He worked in Brooklyn, and he had 6. We had a lot of large families in my family. I have 35 first cousins. He had 6 daughters and a son, but he retired as a lieutenant in 1973, and then he went on to teach at Westchester Community College for over 25 years. And Uncle Bill was somebody that I always admired. He was a man of integrity. But he was a funny guy, and he used to come and tell us stories about what was going on in work. And I said, this is a life I might want to lead, because, as I said, I'm the only police officer in the family. But I think Uncle Bill was my primary motivator. So I came on in '83. I came on as a transit cop. I did that till the merge to 1995. But I always get the opportunity to tell a story about when I was a rookie cop, what we did. We rode trains from 8 at night to 4 in the morning by ourselves. One rookie cop, I rode from 168 in Broadway all the way out to J Street in Brooklyn. And what you did was you did that 3 round trips a night. And we had all sorts of special rules back then. I had a lot of supervision. You had to move from car to car. You could only stay in one car for 3 stops. You had to move to the next car. And what was a validation for me, my choice to become a police officer, is you're riding a train at 2 o'clock in the morning. You're walking through that train, and most people are just coming back and forth to work and just trying to live their lives, live peaceful lives, productive lives. And you could see the sense of relief in their face. And I said, I made the right choice here. We merged in 1995. I had the opportunity to work for Bill Bratton a number of times when he was the chief of the transit police. The first time he was the commissioner, and then when he came back as a commissioner in 2014. I always did my best in whatever position I had. I wasn't worried about what my next job was going to be. No, I tried to be the best cop I could be. I tried to be the best sergeant, the best lieutenant, the best captain, and I think that really helped me move forward. I think the real life changer for me was when I became a precinct commander. I worked in Central Park for 2 years. I worked in the 2-5 in East Harlem for 2 years. And then I worked in a place that for me was transformational, the 44th precinct in the South Bronx. There's about 300 cops that worked there, 150,000 residents, 1.9 square miles. There was violence there. I was there from 2002 to just about 2005. But I saw the level of commitment by the cops that worked there. It wasn't just the cops. It was the 150,000 people that live there. I'm a big community person. I love going to community meetings. We had the community council. We had all sorts of tenant associations. We had business associations. And you can just see people, it was easy to see that people wanted what we want, to live in peace, to be happy, to be safe, to take care of their families. And 35 and a half years later, I still feel the same way. So I had a lot of opportunity. I worked hard. Taking the civil service test, it's difficult. You have to, it would take 6 months, 2 or 3 hours a night to pass that test. But I was lucky enough to pass the sergeant's, lieutenant's, and captain's test, and I consider myself one of the luckiest people in New York City having this job, getting to see what the police officers and the people in this great city do every day.
So you had a remarkable path to date, an exciting career ahead of you, but a remarkable path, lots of influences from your family and from others on the force. So you've been involved in law enforcement since the 80s with New York City. And during that time, there are a lot of policies that have been introduced by leadership that have been under intense scrutiny and have been very controversial. So some of them have included the broken window policing, stop, question, and frisk. How does your experience and your training with these practices influence the way that you lead moving forward as we continue to encounter new challenges?
Yeah, I think this is where my experience as a precinct commander really comes into play. And there's 77 precincts in New York City. I was lucky enough to be the CO of 3 of them. And I think that experience lets you see how much of an effect, if you really care about what you do, how you can really improve the quality of life of the people that live and work there and come to worship there. Broken windows policing, I know that's a controversial term, but it's basically quality of life policing. And it has to be done fairly, it has to be done equitably. But if you don't do it, you're certainly not going to be a precinct commander very long. All those community meetings that I was talking about, that I went to a couple of nights a week, the primary focus of those meetings were people's quality of life. They didn't really talk about homicides, they didn't really talk about shootings, didn't talk about robberies, they talked about quality of life. So that's something as a police department that we have to make sure that we address. So it's an important issue for us. I don't know if did you mention stop and question?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Stop and question is it's a tactic. It's a constitutionally tested tool that the police use to help get guns off the street and to help to stop crime. Unfortunately, in the NYPD, I think the peak year was 2011. There were 600,000 street stops in New York City. But there was a court case, and then we have a federal monitor. Last year, there were, I think, 11 or 12,000 stops compared to 600,000 stops. Again, it's a tool that it has to be used. Otherwise, we're not keeping the people of the city safe, as safe as we could, and that's our obligation. We take an oth. There's not many jobs in the world where you actually take an oath to make sure you do your job correctly. It was overused. It was something that was it was quantified and brought into CompStat, and I think that's why we ended up in the situation that we did end up in. 2014 was a very difficult year for law enforcement, not just in New York City, in the country. It was Ferguson, it was Garner, it was 5 weeks of protest. We had two police officers murdered in December of 2014, Wen Lu, Joe Lu, and Rafael Ramos. And I think if anything good could have come from those 2 police officers being murdered, I think it gave everybody in the police department, but more importantly, everybody in this city, the opportunity to take a breath, to step back and say, what are we doing? What are we doing here? And I think that's, along with myself, along with Terry Monahan, Chief of Department, he was Chief of Patrol at the time, Chief Gomez, we came up with this philosophy of neighborhood policing. We knew we had to evolve. We knew we had to evolve. We knew we had to move forward. Because even after all of that controversy in late 2014, people are still calling 911. People are still calling 311. People are still flagging down police cars. People are still stopping cops on foot posts. And we have an obligation to be responsive to the residents and the people that come into work in New York City. So, I take my job very seriously, as do most of the 36,000, and I'm not going to say all, most of the 36,000 people that are sworn, and the 19,000 civilians that work in the police department.
So we've been working together for a little more than a year. So the School of Professional Studies at Columbia University, along with NYPD, to do the Community Policing Forum. And that's been part of the Columbia Community Justice Project. And in that work, we have done a lot to engage the community, to hear from the community about what their fears, what their concerns, what their feedback is relative to the relationship with the police force in their communities. We've also had a chance to talk with your leadership and work directly with them in training sessions to hear from them what they understand about what the community's concerns are and how to address their concerns while also being able to look inward and think about what are the police officers, the cops' concerns as well. So we've looked at both sides. And my question to you is, can you give a little more context to us about why you thought, as you were joining the force as commissioner, engaging Columbia University to wrangle with these issues was important? Why was the timing right? And what was on your mind about what we could do together to enhance this dialogue and facilitate a discussion?
I think it was important to come to somebody outside policing to get a different perspective. I think we're good at identifying crime problems, but there's so much more that happens in society that it's not just a policing issue, it's a societal issue. And I think that was, I'm very happy we made that connection with the School of Professional Studies at Columbia. It really has helped us move forward. Sometimes you need objectivity, and you need to know why you're doing something, but you don't always have the path to be where you want to go. And I think that's what the school helped us do and continue to do, because we're certainly not done. This is, we're on, step maybe 2 out of 10. And I had the opportunity to go up to my old precinct in the South Bronx a couple of months ago and talk to the neighborhood coordination officers and the NCO sergeant about neighborhood policing. And what I heard from those police officers was better than I expected, much better than I expected. They said this is a program that connects not only the NCOs, but the steady sector cops to the community. And while it's good now, he said, wait 5 years, and you'll see how it's going to transform not just the NYPD, how it's going to transform the whole city. Because people are going to come into the police department, they're going to have that skill set, they're going to be able to communicate, they're going to understand what neighborhood policing is all about. And the people that might have some time on, they're going to end up retiring and moving on. So we're going to have a whole new generation of police officers that'll be involved in this transformation. This is a different way of policing, and it was a big ask to ask police officers to do something different than what they were used to doing. Some people for 20, 25 years, and most of the police officers and sergeants and lieutenants and precinct commanders are embracing this.
So we all know that a couple of weeks ago, there was an incident in Philadelphia where 2 gentlemen were removed from a Starbucks store, right, by police. And the CEO subsequently mandated that there be anti-bias training. All stores will be closed for a half a day. There'll be anti-bias training that will take place that everybody is mandated to participate in. There's been press that similar types of anti-bias training would be useful in police forces across the United States. Some have questioned whether that would work or not. But how do you yourself view these types of programs? There's been a lot of discussion about unconscious bias and anti-bias, and whether the training would be useful for the community, whether the training would be useful for the police force. Do you think that this type of training is good, a good thing? Do you think that it is useful for police officers, for NYPD officers to be able to do this, and do you think it'll work?
Well, we just embarked on implicit bias training in February. We started, and we plan to have all 36,000 police officers trained within the next 2 years. Our executive staff sat for a session. Police officers do become cynical by their very nature over time. We have to try to fight that. I know I fight it, and I think I do a good job of overcoming it. But I think the training was an eye-opener for us. And we're in the process of training the rest of the supervisors, and we'll get this through all 36,000 cops within the next 2 years, as I said. And the initial feedback we're getting from the police officers is by and large, they like it. It's a different way of thinking. I mean, we all grow up in different circumstances. We all have biases, and that doesn't mean that you're a racist. I think that's the thing we had to be careful about. Dr. Lori Friedel is doing the training for us, and it's fair and impartial policing, and police officers in 2018 really can understand what we're trying to do with this training. You know, we're not looking to brainwash anybody. We're just trying to make people aware of certain biases that you have, implicit biases, certainly not explicit biases, that you have as a person. It doesn't make you a bad person, but you have to be aware of it to make sure that we do have the legitimacy in the community when we go out there and do our jobs each and every day. So I'm a huge believer in it.
So we have many community leaders in the room. We have faculty, we have students. You are a leader. I guess I have two follow-up questions for you. One is, for those police officers, people who work for you, and they go out and they do service for the city on a day-to-day, ongoing basis, they want you to advocate for them. Commissioner O'Neill, continue to tell the city, our residents, and the world that we are doing a good job and advocate for us. The community at the same time is saying, be sensitive to the fears that we have, be sensitive to some of the incidences that are happening around the world, and help and listen to us. How do you referee that? How do you answer to both sides? How do you make sure that you are giving your guys and gals the support that they need out in the workforce, and at the same time show the sensitivity to the community for what they need?
So I've been a police officer for a long time, for 35 and a half years. I know what it's like to do patrol. I know what it's like to do detective work. I know what it's like to do narcotics work. I know what it's like to be a precinct commander. I understand what they do each and every day and how difficult a job it is. And I do support them, but I don't support them blindly. If your intentions, I know the road to hell is paved with good intentions, but if you're doing your job in a way that's lawful, I'll support you. In October of 2016, we had a shooting up in the Bronx. Deborah Danner, a 66-year-old woman, a sergeant, ended up shooting and killing her. And I came out the next day and I said that we failed as a police department. I didn't say the sergeant failed. I said we failed. And I've been taking a lot of criticism for that from the Sergeants Union since that happened. But I believe that most police officers know that didn't have to end up that way. So how I justify that is, listen, as the police commissioner, of course, I'm responsible for the well-being of all the people that work for the NYPD, civilian or sworn. But I'm also responsible for the lives and safety of 8.6 million New Yorkers too, and I have to be an advocate for them also. So I think that's the difference between maybe being the chief of department, and Terry's a good person, a good human being, and I know we think alike on a lot of things, and I know he feels the same way about this. But this job is, it's obviously an opportunity of a lifetime for me, but it's an awesome responsibility. And you can't turn your back on the police officers, and you certainly can't turn your back on 8.6 million New Yorkers. And sometimes it's a difficult balancing act. But I go where my conscience leads me.
And so there's a young generation. They're very much influenced by social media. They see lots of video clips. They see lots of memes. They have lots of discussions about what's happening in the world. There's a general sense of fear in the younger generation about the state of the world today, and there's a lot of causes for that. There's a particular sense of concern for young people of color. And so what do you say, what do you offer to young people of color, my kids, for example, teenagers who live in New York City, who say, Commissioner, I'm scared. I'm scared to live in this city and what might happen to me because of what I've seen and what I've heard. So tell me that I'm safe and tell me that it's going to be okay in New York. What do you say to that?
I'll tell you that you will be safe. New York City has never been safer, but it's not just actually being safe, it's feeling safe, and there's a huge distinction there. And what I would tell them is that you're part of this, you're part of the solution here. As I started this discussion, I'm not going to say all 36,000 cops are great. We have our issues, we recruit from society, there are cops that get locked up, I understand that, but by and large, most cops take this job for the right reason, and that's to do good and to make a difference. So what I would say is, if you're concerned about your safety, as far as the police officers are concerned, let's say, hey, you know what? Let's get together and meet some cops. And I think that's what neighborhood policing is all about. It's not just about meeting with residents, homeowners. It's about meeting the youth too. Our NCOs go into schools. They meet with the youth. They engage with them, and that's important. You have to have these frank discussions. Now, I've gone into schools and I've had frank discussions with people, and I have frank discussions all over the city. You know, I'm not blind to what the issues are in 2018, and it doesn't even happen. It doesn't have to even be just a bad situation in New York City. It could be anywhere in the United States. You know, it could be down in Louisiana. It could be up in Minnesota. It could be anywhere, and it has a direct effect on how people feel about law enforcement, how people feel about the NYPD. It's my job to make sure that everybody in this city knows that we are a police department, that we are a professional police department, and that we are evolving, we are moving forward, and we are doing our best to make that connection to the community. But it can't just be us. It has to be all 8.6 million people getting together with us and continuing to make the city safe and continuing to improve those relationships each and every day.
So we'll close on this one. We have community leaders. We have, again, faculty and graduate students with us this evening. What advice do you have for them, either as leaders, as community leaders? How can they be contributors to the solution, which you have spoken about today, for neighborhood policing and for bridging this divide?
My first, and I'm not a huge advice giver, but my first piece of advice is whatever you're doing, try your best, do your best. And if that means you have to work harder, study harder, do it, because it's going to pay off in the long run, because you'll have a better life. You'll be making a positive contribution to society. I think what else would I would add that you have to go out of your comfort zone. You know, don't just think about don't just live a life where you're comfortable. Go outside, meet people, make sure that whatever decisions you have to make, keep an open mind. I mean, we just were presented with an issue with supervised injection sites, overdose prevention centers. And as a cop, my initial reaction is, oh, we can't do that. But then you look at, there were 1,400 people that died in 2016 of overdoses in New York City. That's 4.5, 5 times our murder rate. That's 5 times the rate of people killed in automobile accidents. We have to come up with different solutions. So that's, we went to visit some sites in Canada. Didn't really like what we saw, but if we're going to do it here, we're going to work with the providers to make sure that maybe we can save some lives. So keep an open mind, communicate, and just work as hard as you can, and I think you'll have a good life.
We have been joined today by James O'Neill, Commissioner of the New York City Police Department, for a special edition of Talks at Columbia. Commissioner, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Doctor. Thank you very much. Thanks.